Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Ask Megan, my LinkedIn Live series. This is the first one actually that I'm doing for 2025. It's February now. January was a little crazy, so we took a break there. But today I want to talk about a question that I've been getting over and over and over again. 'Tis the season for conferences and presentations, right? People are having kickoffs, they're having planning meetings, and I keep getting approached by clients saying, hey, can you help me prepare for this big presentation that I've got? And I know that speaking is really scary for a lot of people. One year, so I'm a member of the National Speakers Association. One year, the t-shirt at our annual conference said, your biggest fear is how I make a living. Right? And it's cute, it's funny, but the reality is that there are a lot of people who get really nervous about speaking. And so I wanted to address some of the things that I've learned and that I help clients with, not just about how to feel comfortable when you're speaking, but also about how to make sure you're going to have a maximum impact. Because you don't want to put all of this work into a talk or a presentation and have it be something that doesn't really change the audience or that doesn't have much of an impact. So what I want to share today is 5 tips, and these are not going to be your standard, things that you'd hear. There's a lot of advice on how to give a good presentation. Hopefully these will be things that are a little bit unique that you've never heard before, that are things that I use personally and that I've coached my clients to use and use with great success. So the first tip I want to share has to do with knowing your audience. But know your audience is kind of generic feedback, right? It's like, all right, what does that mean? There's a very specific question that I ask myself and I ask whoever is planning the event, which is how much do they already know about the topic that I'm going to be speaking about? Whether it's a conference, if it's an internal presentation and we're talking about a particular project or program, how much does the audience actually know about the thing that we're going to be talking about? And in some cases, I will actually go and ask, hey, can I interview a couple members of the audience just to get a feel for what they do and don't know? Because there's a couple reasons I do that. One is you don't want to go over people's heads and get too detailed, and you also don't want to kind of bore them with things that they already know. The second thing is that when we are so close to a topic, we have a tendency to think that everybody knows it. And so it helps to have that gut check to go in and say, you know what? I eat, sleep, and breathe this. I mean, something as simple as Net Promoter Score. I still, when I'm talking to a group formally or informally, will say, how many people are familiar with Net Promoter Score? And probably 30% of the time, I will get people who have never heard of NPS, which for those of us who've worked in the customer experience and customer loyalty space for years, it's like, how could that possibly be? But thinking about how much your audience already knows about the topic can really help you anchor and kind of find the right level and the right context. One tip, sort of a side tip, a tip within a tip, specifically is that if you have a mixed audience or you're not sure, one of the tricks that I use if I'm giving a definition is I will say, now I know a lot of you already know this, but just to make sure we're on the same page, here's how I define X. And it's a way to share a definition of maybe a fundamental concept that you either think they might not know, or some people in the audience might not know, right? So there are verbal tricks that we can use to kind of locate people, anchor people within the right level of knowledge and the right level of context. The second tip is less about what they know and more about what they feel. Thinking about the energy that is going to be in the room or in the virtual meeting when you're talking. Because you can know, I mean, we've all been through this, you can know a lot about a subject. And if you're in like hour 8 of a 10-hour meeting, a lot of what you know about that subject is not going to be retrievable because you're so tired, you're so overwhelmed. I will often ask, are people here because they have to be, or are they here because they want to be? Because the energy level in the room is really going to influence how deep, how granular, and how much they can absorb. It also helps you match the energy in the room, right? As a speaker, one of the things that makes people very nervous sometimes is coming up and facing an audience that looks like, they're about to, listen to someone read War and Peace. Professional speakers know that a lot of audiences can look like that and actually be really interested. So thinking ahead about, these guys are just coming, they're been in meetings all day, bouncing back and forth between meetings, or this is a leadership team that's been listening to pitches and proposals all day. You're just kind of meeting them where they are in terms of the energy of the room, matching your energy and the level of detail that you share in your content to the context of, kind of the reality of how these humans are going to be consuming this information. The third tip is to write a sharing script, right? We think about, okay, here's what they know, here's what they feel, and we tend to think about what do we want to say. But this is about having an impact. It's about being memorable. It's about standing out. And so before you start to think about, well, what is everything I want to say? Think about when they leave this presentation, what do I want them to share? And depending on the kind of presentation, it could be something you want them to share when prompted, right? Oh, hey, I heard about that event. What was the talk about? Oh, it was about this, and that. You give them a couple sentences or a couple paragraphs that they can repeat. It might be something that is more inspirational. You can think about, are there one or two points that I want to really be catchphrases? A lot of people will comment on, Meganisms, sort of things that I say that stick with people. I've said consistently good, strategically amazing as a core customer experience strategy. Another example is that the most effective leaders operate more as catalysts than crusaders. Those phrases are memorable for a reason. And there's actually a lot of work that goes into making sure that that point that I could have said, any one of a dozen other ways, is something that is memorable and catchy. And there's all sorts of word tricks, alliteration, repetition, contrast, things like that you can use. But sitting down before you write the bulk of the talk and thinking about, what do I want people to say? What do I want people to remember? Really helps you kind of whittle out a lot of the stuff that you could say. Say, it'd be great for them to know that, but I know they're only going to be able to remember one or two things. One of the things when you've got your sharing script, one of the things that you can do, and this is my fourth tip, is finding a metaphor or an analogy that really resonates with people or drives things home. And the thing about metaphors and analogies, they do a couple of really powerful things. One is they connect what you're talking about to something that people already know about and understand. So if you've heard me talk about customer experience is the eat healthy and exercise of the business world, right? As soon as I make that comparison, light bulbs go off in most people's minds. It doesn't go over as well outside the US because I think other countries aren't as obsessed with, sort of diet and exercise culture as the US. But there's so much about that metaphor and that struggle that fills in the blanks for people. And they can remember that and repeat that comparison. One of the things that people, I think, don't often do, but that's a really good practice, is actually thinking about different metaphors. I did this with a client. We were introducing a program at an upcoming leadership team meeting. We actually sat down and went through like 10 or 15 different domains. We went to sports, we went to history, we went to technology, and thought about, what are some different metaphors and analogies that we could use to talk about. This was a transformation, and we really wanted to get across the transformation from this to this. And was there another transformation analogy that we could use? And we ended up picking one, and it worked exceptionally well. Some of the other ones I had thought of, and she said, yeah, no, that'll never work here. It'll fall flat. So when you hear people who use these metaphors and analogies in their talks, and it just sounds like that's so obvious, right? That takes work, and you can do it too. It's just a question of practicing and thinking through, what is the point I'm trying to make? What is the comparison I'm trying to make? And what is something that is comparable that I can bring in that's maybe more concrete and tangible, that people can remember. I'll give you another example from a technology company that I was working with. We were talking about the importance of voice of the customer. And this is a company that runs, 24/7, high uptime, mission critical infrastructure. And so we said, would you ever run your network without having any analytics, without having any visibility into the operations of the health of the network? And they said, of course not. Like, that's ridiculous. And we knew that's what they were going to say. But the point was, well, that's basically what you're doing with your customer base. You are running a business that is serving customers, and you have absolutely no visibility into what your customers are experiencing. And the almost ridiculousness of the first question actually drove home how serious the second question that they had answered and thought about very differently, how big of a problem that was, and whether or not it was something they really needed to solve. So thinking about analogies and metaphors, but really taking the time to think about the point, the comparison, and what's going to be the strongest thing that will resonate with people. And then the last tip that I will share is to use anecdotes. And I use the word anecdote. It's a fancy word for story. But the word story has gotten really diluted in the speaking world. There's a story of your talk where you could say, hey, we're facing this situation and we have to do this. And, here's my call to the future. That's one form of story. An anecdote is a story about usually something that has already happened, about a real person, and it's situational and contextual. And anecdotes are, like all stories, things that are easier for people to remember. They're also easier for people to relate to, right? So instead of talking about customers doing X, Y, Z, you can talk about, a particular person who was sitting in this situation, facing this, and here's the impact that this had. Or, it would have gone this way and then it went that way. If you have anecdotes that are based on actual real people with names, that's great. If you don't, you can use them as hypotheticals. I was working with a client. I've had several clients lately, actually, who wanted to really bring home the impact that their company's work has on people's day-to-day lives. And so instead of talking about, just sort of big conceptual, we help people accomplish their goals, we told the story of, hey, this family was getting ready to go on vacation and the tire blew out on their car. And if it weren't for the services that we provide, that vacation would have been ruined. But because we did what we do, they were able to get that tire fixed and go on vacation and get another year's worth of memories. That kind of a story, it's going to resonate more with people in the moment, and it is more likely to be repeated. Things like that, if they're hypothetical, it kind of depends on the situation, how likely they are to kind of end up in the repeat script. But that is going to be more memorable and more repeatable than something that is, just a discussion of the royal they or the royal we. So I know I've thrown a lot at you. Let me just do a quick recap. Number one, my first tip was think about what your audience already knows about the topic you're talking about. If you can, even better, ask, try to find out. Think about the energy that is going to be in the room and sort of their mental and physical state. That's going to help you calibrate your content, your pace, your energy to what they can realistically absorb in the moment. Write some kind of a sharing script, or kind of write down and pre-think out, what do you want them to say? What do you want them to remember? And then see if you can find a metaphor or an analogy that really fits that nicely and tightly, that you can use to connect to, or as an example of the principle or the idea that you're trying to get people to remember and repeat. And then the last thing is using anecdotes, focusing on human stories, because at the end of the day, abstract concept and ideas are really powerful. I mean, I make my living talking about concepts and ideas, but they become real to people when they intersect with the actual events of someone's life. And so anecdotes, whether about actual people or hypothetical people, help create stories and tales that people can repeat, because other people are going to be able to relate to those as well. So I will fully admit that all 5 of those things take work and take practice. These are things that I did not necessarily know or do when I first started speaking, and I don't expect most people to know or do. So if you have a presentation coming up and you want to talk about, how do I actually do this in my unique situation, message me. I'd be happy to hop on the phone and talk about this. But hopefully this gives you a few things to think about as you prepare, that will give you some confidence that, what I'm going to say is not only going to be engaging in the moment, but it's going to be something that will have an impact after I get done presenting. So thank you for your time. I don't see any comments on the screen, which could be because they're not coming in, but I'm going to assume that if you have comments, I'm going to give you a minute to go ahead and pop them in. Okay, I don't see any comments popping up. So in that case, I will sign off for this month, say thank you. I hope you found this useful, and look forward to our next session of Ask Megan, when I will answer questions that you all are asking me that I think lots of people could benefit from hearing the answer from. Thanks, and have a great day.